Seriously, did the SEC just crack the door open for an XRP ETF? Or are we watching another regulatory soap opera? Now, I spent the whole night chasing that answer, and what I dug up will blow your mind. So picture this, it's 2 a.m. I'm half asleep on the couch, the cat is using my hardware wallet as a pillow, and my phone lights up like a headline, at least with a headline, I should say. SEC formally begins review of WisdomTree's XRP ETF. Now, my first reaction, wait, did someone accidentally hit publish on an April Fool's Day joke? But no, it's actually real. It's the Federal Register, right? And suddenly my brain is wired like I just chugged a triple espresso. Now, instead of doom scrolling another meme coin thread, I grab a notebook. I fire up a fresh pot of coffee and go down the rabbit hole so that you don't have to. Now, maybe you're thinking ETFs, snooze. And stick with me here, because whenever the SEC kind of cracks open a file labeled XRP, it's kind of like peeking into Pandora's lunchbox. Half the office wants to see what's inside, and the other half is yelling, "Don't open it." And here's why you should care, even if you don't own a single Ripple in your wallet. Now, a green light on the ETF could pull pension fund money, robo-advisor allocations, and that one uncle who still thinks Bitcoin is an Xbox game, straight into crypto. Now, mainstream exposure changes everything, and it could be the spark that we all have been waiting for. So, what actually went down? Well, let's rewind to February 6th, right? The kind of 𝗕𝗘𝗀𝗀𝗀, the BZX exchange, think of them as kind of the friendly matchmaker, files a proposal to list the WisdomTree XRP fund. Now, on February 26th, it pops up on the Federal Register. That's basically the government's public bulletin board where they pin everything from new airline seatbelt rules to, yep, crypto ETF dreams. Now, public comments period, they open. Picture a digital suggestion box where lawyers, trolls, and even grandmas can drop all of their 2 Satoshis into it. Fast forward to March 11, and the SEC, in classic government fashion, hits the snooze button and extends the review period. Now, crypto Twitter sighs a collective deja vu, but then cue dramatic drum roll. May 27th rolls around. Now, the SEC issues a notice. We're formally starting proceedings to decide whether we bless or bury this thing. That's kind of the bureaucratic speak for enough kind of, prelims and bring on the lawyers and the popcorn. But here is the kicker. The commission isn't starting at price charts or judging how shiny the XRP logo looks on merch. They're laser focused on Section 6B5 of the Exchange Act, which basically says, "Dear exchanges, your rules must prevent manipulation and fraud." The translation here, the SEC wants proof that shady whales can't splash around and soak retail investors. Now, they want assurances that CBOE's surveillance trains can actually spot spoofing faster than my cat sports a laser pointer. Okay, so let's sprinkle in some fund mechanics so that you can flex at brunch. The WisdomTree XRP ETF aims to mirror the CME CF Ripple dollar reference rate. It's fancy talk for a daily benchmark price struck, I should say, at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Inside the kind of vault, there will be 3 things: cash, XRP, and cash equivalents. No kind of wacky leverage, no derivative sorcery. Shares get created or redeemed in blocks of 5,000 through cash deals, with authorized participants. There's no in-kind XRP transfers, so nobody kind of wheeling barrows of tokens into warehouse, for example. So why is this a big deal? And it's because the SEC already kind of grudgingly approved spot Bitcoin ETFs that allow in-kind transfers. Now, WisdomTree is kind of taking the keep it simple route, but there's a kind of twist here. Will the SEC demand the same surveillance sharing agreements that they squeezed out of the Bitcoin issuers? If yes, then does CBOE already have enough hooks in the global XRP market to sniff out any foul play? And that's the, well, million-dollar riddle. Zoom out with me here, right? Remember July 2023 when Ripple scored that partial court victory. Now, the judge said that XRP isn't necessarily a security when traded on exchanges. Now, that ruling was like yanking ankle weights off of XRP's price. Suddenly, banks, fintechs, and yes, ETF issuers started whispering, maybe we can dabble. Now, WisdomTree isn't alone here. Bitwise, Grayscale, Franklin Templeton are drafting their own XRP ETF game plans as we kind of speak. So here's a quick anecdote then, right? My buddy Dave works at a traditional asset management shop. Now, he used to roll his eyes every time that I said crypto. Now, last night he texts me, so this XRP ETF, does that mean that my boss will finally stop banning the C word in my client meetings? And that's the domino effect here, right? ETFs wear a kind of suit and tie of legitimacy. Pension funds that wouldn't touch a crypto exchange with a kind of 10-foot pole can suddenly actually buy shares of XRP exposure like they buy Apple or gold. But there's a plot twist. Remember the SEC's kind of modus kind of operandum, right? They kind of love setting deadlines, then kicking the can down the road for a little bit later. Don't be shocked if August rolls around and we get another extension, right? Patience is the name of the game here. Regulation moves slower than, well, dial-up internet. So while we wait, there are three things that we can do. One, we can get smarter, right? We can peek into, or at least peek at the public comments, maybe even file one too if we want to. Second, or two, I should say, monitor sentiment, right? ETFs thrive on demand. If macro fears spike, inflows do dry up. And three, shameless plug, join our free crypto Discord server via the link that's in the description. We break down this stuff daily without any of the jargon. Plus, we have cat memes with science proves boost retention. Okay, jokes aside, speaking of leveling up, if you're itching to start trading instead of just watching, why don't you check out Bluefing, which is our go-to exchange, which is also linked in the description below. It's got deep liquidity, lightning fast execution, and a slick UI so clean that my technophobic aunt even opened up her first position in just 10 minutes. So sign up, grab the bonuses, and see why the pros keep whispering, have you tried Bluefin yet? All right, let's get back to the rabbit hole then, right? Number time, right? XRP's 30-day volatility hovers around 45%. That's tamer than some meme coins, but spicier enough to make your smartwatch ask if you're okay. An ETF could smooth that ride for traditional investors because the fund can offset flows with cash. But there's a risk of disconnect if ETF shares trade at a premium or discount. Now remember early kind of gold ETFs? They sometimes kind of drifted until arbitrage caught up. Now, another technical tidbit, is big authorized participants will likely source XRP OTC because on-exchange liquidity outside of Asia hour can be pretty thin. Now, that means that spreads get chunky and if institutional cash does flood in too fast. Now, that also is kind of when CBOE's kind of surveillance really does matter. Can they monitor 24/7 asset trading on dozens of venues? Some barely even regulated. If their answer to the SEC is trust us bro, this proposal is toast. They need ironclad data feeds, maybe even cross-exchange cooperation agreements. So launching an XRP ETF without that is kind of like opening a swimming pool in shark-infested waters, but promising the lifeguard has binoculars. Now, you better trust those binoculars work at night and through murky water, or somebody's going to be, losing a limb, or nobody's actually letting their kids even get in the pool. And so, where does WisdomTree stand then? Well, historically, they're the kind of sensible sneakers of asset management. They're comfortable, reliable. They're no flashy kind of, rhinestones. They just jump into blockchain early via their digital wallet outfit and have solid custody partners lined up. The translation here is that they're not tourists. They have the kind of plumbing ready, which the SEC likes. Still, though, market manipulation is the elephant tap dancing in the room, right? XRP's critics point out that roughly half of the supply still sits in Ripple's escrow, released programmatically. Now, that concentration could rattle price stability. Fans argue that the predictable unlock schedule is actually more transparent than Bitcoin's mining emissions, so expect the SEC to grill everyone on that one. And let's not forget, right, the SEC is still sparring with Ripple in call over institutional sales of XRP. Approving an ETF while fighting Ripple sounds like arguing with yourself in public. But regulators are human, they don't love contradicting themselves. So, will they swallow pride for the sake of investor protection? That internal tug of war is, well, pure Shakespeare. Okay, so here's a little mini experiment to show interest then, right? On one of our live AMAs last week, we shout out to anyone who was there, I kind of polled 100 viewers. If an XRP ETF launches, will you allocate at least 1% of your portfolio? 73 said yes, 9 said that they would wait a quarter to see volume, and 8 proudly answered no, I'm married to frog coins. I know, anecdotal, sure, but it kind of shows pent-up demand. Of course, that's fictional, but it gives you an idea as to kind of where the perception currently lies. Bloomberg Intelligence, they pegs potential inflows at $3 billion in the first year if the market mood stays bullish. Gold ETFs pulled in $1 billion in 2004 without the rocket fuel of social media. Double daily XRP volume, add price discovery, and you kind of dampen manipulation. Liquidity begets stability, stability invites bigger checks. All right, so quick detour for the nerds then, right? Spot ETFs, like the one that WisdomTree wants, actually hold the underlying assets. That's real XRP in a qualified custodian cold wallet. Futures ETFs, by contrast, hold Chicago futures contracts and roll them every single month. Now that roll costs can actually eat into returns faster than gas fees on Ethereum during a meme coin frenzy. So if you're wondering why Wall Street keeps chanting spot, not futures, that is why. Nobody wants performance drag when you just want to own the real thing and call it a day. And speaking of custodians, the filing name drops top tier providers. So think SOC-2, Type 2, audited, hardware secured vaults with private keys sliced up like cryptographic pizza and stored on opposite continents. The SEC loves that kind of belt and suspenders approach because it means that one rogue employee can't split off to a non-extradition country with grandma's retirement fund. But custody, it's only half the battle. Pricing is the other. The CME CF index pulls data from major exchanges, tosses outliers, and computes a volume-weighted average. That means a flash crash on some obscure offshore platform won't actually yank the funds, the NAV, off a cliff. Now, WisdomTree's lawyers will hammer that point in every footnote. Look, we've de-risked price discovery. We worked for the Bitcoin ETS, and, it might just work here as well. Unless, of course, commissioners, decide XRP's market structure is, well, just a little bit too patchy. And so that makes the next question quite important. What exactly is the SEC afraid of? Well, you got to picture the 2010 flash crash, but, staring a kind of token, or, I guess starring a token, already kind of wrapped in regulatory controversy. Now, they want to avoid grandma calling her broker mid-brunch because her shiny new Ripple trust vaporized in 90 seconds. That's why surveillance agreements, custody audits, and robust pricing indexes, are the holy trinity of ETF approvals. There are also politics, right? Election season is, just gone by, and crypto unexpectedly became the kind of swing state issue, if you will. right? Some candidates, are kind of waving the banner of innovation, and, others are hammering on consumer protection. Approving or denying an XRP ETF will get spun, into campaign history, talking points for years to come. So get ready for kind of cable news, kind of sound bites like, what the SEC's XRP decision means for Main Street. And, and that's kind of what I guess I should say, when we all know that the narrative busted out of the crypto bubble quicker than you can say XRP. But my personal confession here is that back in 2017, I bought XRP for around 11 cents and 30 cents, right? I watched it moon to $3, and then the diamond handed it back down like a stubborn sea captain refusing to abandon his ship. If an ETF existed, I might have hedged with a cheap but, maybe even put the fund on the fund instead of, maybe white knuckling on the voyage, right? ETFs create an entire ecosystem, things like options, leverage plays, even short instruments. More tools means more smarter kind of risk management for everyone, from pension funds to weekend traders. Oh, and here's a fun fact, right? The filing hints that the fund could lend its XRP to earn yield if regulators and regulations allow. Extra yield could offset management fees, making the ETF cheaper than holding tokens directly. Expect a fee war. WisdomTree's Bitcoin fund charges just 30%, or should say 0.3%, right? If they kind of mirror that for XRP, other issuers will scramble to match or even beat it. Competition breeds innovation and cheaper exposure for the rest of us. Now, before I go and morph into your kind of finance professor, let's ground this down. The takeaway is actually quite simple. The SEC asking tough but fair questions. WisdomTree has done its homework, and the next few months will test just how mature the XRP market really is. Whether you're a die-hard Ripple fan or a skeptical Bitcoiner, the ripple effect, pun unavoidable, could actually reshape how institutions view altcoins in general. Okay, so timeline check, right? The SEC has up to 240 days from the first publication to drop a final verdict, putting the outer kind of deadline around late October. Now, historically, they decide on the second to last deadline. So circle, early September in pencil, and this is kind of government after all. Now, between now and then, expect a parade of white papers, podcast debates, and hot take threads cluttering your feed. If you want the kind of TLDR without the migraine, the large Discord's daily brief has you covered. And if the market moves kind of give you itchy trigger fingers, Bluefin's advanced order types, TWAP, iceberg, the works, well, help you kind of slide into positions without causing, ripples. Worst case scenario, the SEC rejects it. XRP might take a knee-jerk 15% drop, but long-term, someone else will refile, maybe add a fancy new surveillance widget, and the cycle repeats. Remember, right? Bitcoin ETFs, they were rejected more times than my first high school promposal before approval. And one last nugget, right? WisdomTree's filing. It hints the fund could, lend its XRP to yield, at least earn yield, if regulators allow, right? Now, that extra revenue could offset management fees, making the ETF cheaper than XRP, or at least holding XRP on an average exchange. So yield plus institutional grade custody, that's kind of catnip for big money managers then. So back to that 2 a.m. headline then. I'm now on cup 4, right? The cat is snoring, and I realize we're kind of watching history draft itself in real time. Whether the SEC stamps approved or denied, the very fact that we're at formal proceedings means the kind of Overton window shifted. XRP, once crypto's kind of black sheep cousin, just scored an invite to the adults table. So stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep your sense of humor because crypto history loves irony. When the SEC posts its next notice, I'll be right there, sleep deprived, feeding the cat, and smashing refresh so that you don't have to.